teaching Japanese, it was very rewarding because in the first year they cannot say any word, and then by the end of the fourth year, they are very communicative. So it was, I can actually see the progress, in students, and that was rewarding to me.
I think what's appealing to me about teaching is really I like to hear the sound of my own voice, so I think we can all confess to that at times. But I think to me, what's interesting is really the chance to form relationships with students and learn from them and sort of hear their perspectives as well. When I think about what I remember the most about, I've only been teaching 7 years, so I don't have a long career, but what I remember the most about different classes is I just remember the faces in the class, and even if I can't remember everyone's name, and I remember the people that I got to know the best, I think about the conversations that we may have had, and the handful of people that I'm still in touch with, I really, means a lot to me that they think of me as someone that they want to continue to communicate with even as they're
Say that teaching is part of my DNA. My mother was a teacher as well, and I was doing tutoring back in high school, so it's just a part of my life, as it were, and I was a winner of a number of teaching awards when I was a graduate student. And so it comes naturally, I guess, to me to be in the classroom and to have that sense of altruism, to help other people understand and appreciate the same depth of excitement that I have for my discipline, and to share that with students. And the notion that we touch thousands of people's lives in our classroom always comes home when you have visitors. And this week we had a visitor, somebody who is the chair of the Department of Neurology at the Medical College of Georgia, who remembers having taken organic chemistry here at GW in the 1980s. And those moments are the exciting moments that come back to you to realize, to help you realize that what you are doing really does make a difference.
After my master's degree, I decided to go out and save the world, and packed my bags and went to Thailand and was going to join the Peace Corps and just really make a big difference. And after a year of being there, I realized that I wasn't quite as tough as I thought I was. And I wasn't really cut out for that line of work. And so I looked at my life and I said, where could I truly make that difference and help other people go out and do what I'm not quite cut out to do? And that meant working in higher education, helping educate and working with young people, and helping them learn fundamental skills, fundamental knowledge that they then can go out and make a difference.
I've known I wanted to be a teacher since I was about 8 years old. I was taking a walk one day, going from lunch to a classroom in a school on the island of Madagascar, where my father was a Foreign Service officer. I was looking down as I was walking down the hill, and I had this, I guess, as close to a revelation as one can have at 8 or 9, and I thought, I'm going to teach. I'm going to teach. And then I went on and taught. My first job teaching ever was as after college, with all of the idealism that many of us shared, and probably still do, and although it's taken on different forms, in an inner city school, and that was the first time I was ever threatened with a deadly weapon in my life. But we moved on and acquire some toughness. But it's so interesting listening even to the few people who've spoken so far. It reminds me of something that a remarkable man once told me. He was one of the Soviet Jewish dissidents in the 70s, applied for an exit visa. Was a brilliant aerophysicist, worked as a stoker of boilers for years afterwards, and until he was allowed to go. And I was interviewing him for a book I was doing at that time on the return of the Soviet Jews, and I asked him, I said, well, were you scared? Weren't you, wasn't this daunting? Why did you do what you did? And he and his wife looked at me and had these very knowing grins on their faces. And they said, for us it was normal. And I think for those of us who teach and who love to teach, we're doing what's normal for us. And because it's normal, we love it and we enjoy it. one of the things that keeps me going is that I'm intensely curious about my students. You know, how people think today. How do young people think? It's a question I go into every class with. How has technology changed their thinking? How do they approach research? Because I certainly couldn't push a search button. I had to go through cards, you know, and does that mean anything for the way their brain works? And those questions interest me about them. And so I always have something to learn when I go into a classroom. And they teach me everything I know about technology.
And I was always an avid reader. And my parents are, my father is a construction worker, my mother's a secretary. So I didn't really have a sense of what the love of reading could do as a profession until, you know, my parents really valued education. So my mom went to work at the local university so that we could go to school, and college blew my mind. So that's why, oh gosh, I'm pregnant and emotional. I wanted to live there. It was a complete world of ideas in a way that I had never experienced. And so that was formative. I wanted to spend forever there. And now I get to.
I went to graduate school to avoid having to make a resume and get a job and do what I saw other graduates doing. And I chose English because it kind of came naturally to me, and I loved reading. And then I found myself sort of wanting to teach once I got punted into the classroom in graduate school as part of my teaching assistantship. So, and I, like John was saying, there's lots of things I love about teaching, but I especially love the relationships I form with students.
I never intended to be a teacher. You know, I intended to be a clinician. You know, my background is in nursing, and I saw myself, you know, really in the care environment. And it was interesting because I had moved to DC, and I was a freshly minted nurse practitioner, and there weren't many nurse practitioners at that time. And so my first position was really with the geriatrics team at GW, seeing patients and you know, lots of different settings. And there had been a nurse practitioner program started, and the director left, and there was basically nobody else to pick up the direction of that program. And so they had asked if I would do it. And you know, one of the problems that I've always had in my life is that it's hard to say no to really exciting opportunities and you know, doors opening, and that gets the faculty a little crazy sometimes. But I found then that I just loved working with students. I loved the teaching. Every day. It was not like a job. It was just, you know, it was like, wow, this has to be the best experience in the whole world. And it's having to stay current, so you have to keep, you know, knowledgeable about things. It's the relationship with the students. It's, you know, watching them, and having now been in education for quite a while, it's really watching them develop and watching people's careers and then bringing them back into the program and having them help us. And so it's just been so exciting, but it was never intended. But it's been just a fabulous serendipitous circumstance.
The reason I went into teaching was serendipitous. I practiced as a nurse manager for many years in hospitals in the Washington, D.C. area. I went back to graduate school thinking I would be some sort of researcher or consultant on Capitol Hill and work with policy. And I was almost finished my dissertation when Ellen Dawson contacted me. I hadn't heard from her for about 3 years. I met her at George Mason, where I taught as an adjunct, and she was my boss while I was there, and asked me out to lunch. And I thought, well, isn't that nice to reconnect after 3 years? And, so I, you know, she started talking to me about the programs at GW, and I listened and said that was, you know, how nice it was coming in. She actually had to spell it out. Brenda, I'm recruiting you. I had anything. And she said, have you ever thought about teaching? And I said, no, I haven't thought about teaching. And then I paused for a second, and I said, but that seems to be the path that keeps opening up in front of me, because I had been teaching as an adjunct and really liked it. And then here was this opportunity that I had never even thought would come into my life. So I said, maybe I'm supposed to go down that path. And she said, maybe you are. So I came to GW, and it's just been wonderful. I just said to someone yesterday that being at GW is like a piece of academic heaven, and that's what I feel like. The doors that have been opened up to me and the opportunities to interact with students and make a difference in their lives so they can go out and make a difference in other people's lives.
Teaching is my second career. I like Jean and Brenda, worked for many years as a nurse and a nurse practitioner and really didn't think about teaching for a long time. But, when you're in nursing, you just always are working with students in many different ways, usually in a clinical environment. And one of the things you realize when you work with students is they test you. And, it keeps you kind of current in your profession, current in your knowledge. And it's challenging, to keep up and also, figure out ways of helping them to learn these things that are so difficult. And so, during that process, I kind of realized that would be the next step for my career. And so I started working here at GW 13 years ago, initially working in clinical research and then doing teaching part-time and then eventually full-time. And, I really love to teach. I'm on the teaching advisory committee or whatever the true title of that is. And, one of the questions that we're looking at is how to help teachers teach better, and it seems to me kind of strange. I don't understand why someone wouldn't want to teach better, because teaching better just brings so much to your life, your professional life. I think that as all of us have said, teaching is a wonderful career. It brings us an opportunity to touch people's lives. And, when I get those emails, as many of you have, months or, semesters or years later, and they say, oh, when you said that thing, or when you taught me that thing, that made such a difference in my life. And this is what I'm doing with that knowledge. That just is, it's better than a teaching award.
And my guess is that maybe secretly or maybe not so secretly, people in science will say that what draws you to an academic career at a university is an opportunity to do the research that you define in a way that is not to be found in industry or government labs or other places. So, frankly, I got into research, applied to jobs at research universities for the research part of that, not the university part of that. And along the way, you have to sort of sort out the teaching part of this too. And I think that although that sounds pretty cynical, the truth is that there's not like I do this and then I do this, that they're the same thing. And that's the approach I try to bring to certainly the courses that I've done for the honors program, but also even general chemistry classes, that you have to come in loaded for bear, excited, pumped up, and say, okay, we're doing this really boring stuff that you have to know, but this is why this matters, and this is the relevance to things that are pretty interesting. I think that a group of 15 honor students are more receptive to that message usually than the 100 people in a general chemistry class, because the stuff that you're shoveling is pretty thick. So anyway, I think that I view the teaching something is something that you do as part of your job, but it's a continuum. It's not there's not just okay, now I'm doing it in a classroom, I'm doing this. Now in my lab, I'm doing this. It's all the same thing.
I went to a large research university that was not so focused on teaching at the undergraduate level. That's fair to say. And I remember taking undergraduate organic in one of these large sort of amphitheater-style auditoriums, and the guy was way down there, and he wrote the book, which is in my office. And he was also, he happened to be my advisor, my major advisor, who I saw twice in my 4 years. And, but I remember thinking, I want to do that. I want to be that person that explains this supposedly hard subject to all of these undergrads who may or may not want to be there. And that's what I want to do. So that was sort of my first inkling of that, because at the time I was pre-med. That changed. And, but then since then, so then I was at NIH most recently, and they didn't have a student population. I was an intramural researcher there, and I noticed that. I noticed not having students in lab. not in a classroom setting, but in a research lab. When you don't have students in a research lab, it changes the tone of the work that goes on there. So that's something that I was missing. I missed the lecture component, but I also missed the laboratory component sort of distinctly. And then once I came to GW, so I consciously made the choice to go to a university. And once I got here, one of the things that I love, because I do teach organic chemistry, and it doesn't come naturally for people all the time. So you find ways of making them care, and making these very maybe complex principles or theories very understandable. Right? You break it down, but then you see the aha moment. You see the light bulb go off, and that is what makes it worth it to me, anyway. And I think, echoing some of Houston's statements, marrying teaching not only in the laboratory, not only in the classroom, but then in the lab, and having undergraduates work as a researcher in your lab and helping mold those students, whether they're going to go on to medical school or they're going to go on to get graduate degrees in science. That's, I think, where you can have a huge, huge impact, and that's where I see the benefit of GW, a huge benefit of GW, the size and the approach that it takes in terms of incorporating young students into the research programs, classroom level, but also in the laboratory.
I knew I wanted to teach actually 20 years ago this semester. I was taking a class at University of Pennsylvania by an instructor named Philip Reif. He was a sociologist, and he was teaching a course, Aesthetics of Authority in Art. And I signed up for it because it sounded so cryptic, and it would fulfill one of my sociology requirements. And I had no idea what it was, so I signed up for the class. At the time, I was doing AIDS activist work, so I had, this will be surprising to folks who know me, but I had a shaved head except for like one little layer of hair that I wore on top of my head and a little pigtail. I had a pierced nose, and I went to my class in combat boots, and during office hours, during the first week of class, Dr. Reif said to me, you know, people like me, and he, at the time he was very old, and had a very, very small dog that he would bring to class with him because he had tenure, and he said, they can't fire me. So he would bring this dog into class, and it was his math, it started with 75, and he said, at the first day of class, there will be 10 of you by the end of the semester. And so during office hours the first week, he said, you need to understand, Miss Aquaviva, that people like me view people like you as substandard human beings. I'll never forget it. And I was really upset. I was really distressed. But upon further discussion, he was trying to help me understand that if I wanted to change the world, and I showed up like the first day of class with my ACT UP t-shirt. I mean, I was very obnoxious about it visually. He said, if you want to change the world, you have to be able to speak the language of the people that you're trying to get to change. And so it changed me. Now, would I ever tell a student they're a substandard human being? No, I wouldn't. But his harshness changed my view of how you can change the world. That it doesn't have to all be through activism, it can be a combination of things. And he helped me understand also that teachers aren't just teaching content, but you're also teaching students about how to interact with their world and how to make it a better place.
I was born into a household where there were two academicians, my mother and my father. And I come from a family of civil servants and educators in general. Back then, of course, when I was 5 years old, it didn't mean much until I was dragged out of my comfortable home, my circle of friends, and thrown into a kindergarten in Austin, Texas. I'm from Turkey, so imagine the cultural shock that I went through. The first day at school, don't know a single word of English, and when I come home, they ask me, how did it go? What did you learn? And I say, Daddy will be back, without ever knowing what it meant. But the teachers must have repeated that so many times that I was proudly blurting out my first language, learning in English. Daddy will be back. You know what that means? I have no idea. Daddy will be back. So that's how my venture into teaching really started, with that. And after 2 years, they did their master's at UT. We went back to Turkey. I continued my life. And at the age of 11, they went back again to UT for a PhD. So I knew the drill. You would pack up, leave everything behind, and then show up. But I knew a little bit of English by then, so the transition was easier. But what those two episodes taught me was how important it was for my parents to continue their education, to continue to develop and learn in general. And of course, throughout this period, they would always take me to their offices at the university. I would sit down and draw pictures like every other kid would do when taken to work. And I would get to witness the love, the admiration, the respect that they received from their students. So it kind of implied to me that teaching was a cool thing. You got recognized and appreciated for it. But there was also a contradiction in my life as I got closer to college, because apparently society thought that the best and the brilliant had to do other things, like they had to become physicians, they had to become engineers, and they had to go to private enterprise, earn good income, become stars themselves. And back in my time in the 80s, if you were the best and the brilliant, you had to go to certain colleges. And I was, without knowing, really following the prescription that society had handed me. You do this tick, you do this tick. So I became an electrical engineer. And then I did an MBA, and following the prescription, I went to Citibank and started life for the very first time in my family as a member of private enterprise and corporate America. And I was, on the first day, I remember making twice as much as both of my parents combined. And that was something that I felt really proud about. Naive, of course, hollow, shallow, but nevertheless proud. So that kept me going for a while. Then I went into Mobil Oil, joined another corporation, continued doing systems analysis. And then I got shipped over to London to participate in certain projects, international experience, really good, cool expat life. But then slowly the realization began to sink in, and that was I was being valued in general for what I did, not necessarily who I was in life. I was becoming more a function, not a person. People came to me because of the things that I did, not because of who I was or my ideas. Now, a little bit of frustration sets in and learning stops after a while. I felt the need to learn more, but I couldn't. I wanted to express and share my ideas, but I couldn't. So on this side, I decided to look up a doctoral program, and I found George Washington Executive Leadership Program. So I continued that. And then I realized, oh my God, my role models are completely different people. They're not here in corporate America. They are in universities. My parents, even going back to elementary school, my teachers, and here the professors at GW. So then it became clear that the act of becoming, for me, had to be in a different venue. I had to become something else. So after completing my degree, that's how I got into teaching. So to summarize, I guess there are really three factors. The one thing is the environment into which I was born, and some people have referred to that as it's my genes. So I guess I can repeat that same thing, it's the DNA. The second thing is the quest for continuous learning, and of course teaching allows one to do that quite successfully, as we all know. And the third element is being recognized for who I am and what I think, not necessarily what I do. And what really made that clear was I'm in distance education, so I don't get to see any of my students. But when it's time for graduation, out of the crowd usually jumps somebody and hugs me and starts kissing me and pulls me over to introduce me to their family. Pictures taken, smiles shared, and stories told, and I have no idea. This is a total stranger. I don't know these people, but apparently I have done something that has truly impacted their lives to the extent that they feel proud enough to introduce me to their families and have pictures taken. So that element of recognition, I think, goes beyond belief. There's no way I can get that sort of recognition working in private enterprise. No way. So those three things combined, I guess, kind of determined my career path into teaching.
I feel compelled to add my story to this, just because I don't feel it quite measures up to everybody else's, but several of the stories reminded me of myself, because I was also dragged more or less kicking and screaming into what I do now. Even though I was doing it from a fairly early age, I like to talk, and I remember as a senior in high school giving a talk to the Kiwanis Club about nuclear energy. As a freshman, I was elected class president. As a sophomore, I wrote a book about our university. As junior, I wrote a paper about how my university was systematically teaching me not to have opinions about things. And then as a graduate student, as a doctoral student, my first assignment was to be staff director for a commission on engineering education. Now, I was a management doctoral student, but that was the RA that I had. And Then as a second-year doctoral student, I did another paper on history of an interdisciplinary research laboratory, and finally I thought, well, I don't know what else to do a dissertation about. I guess I'll do it about universities. So I wrote a dissertation about 25, 30 years of the history of the civil engineering department at MIT, and intellectually and organizationally how it had changed and what that signified about how academics might take more control over the way that their programs changed. In the process of doing the dissertation, which amazingly took longer than the year that the Sloan School of Management said that a dissertation would take, my committee, never having much trust in me, said that, well, you've got some initial ideas about what's going on in this department. You should go to see some senior academics in the area and share your ideas with them. So one of the people that I went to see was a fellow named David Reisman, who had written a book called The Lonely Crowd, Academic Revolution. And he was a prince, by the way. You know, if you ever want to model yourself on anybody, model yourself on David Reisman. Here I am, a doctoral student that nobody's ever heard of from another university. I come into his office, and in comparison with other people who I'd also met in the same expedition, he was just extraordinarily hospitable. He greeted me at the door. He made some tea for me, you know, sit down. We chatted for about half hour, 45 minutes. He was very helpful. And to anticipate, over the next 2 years, we continued to correspond about what I was doing. But after about 45 minutes, he said, are you interested, when you're finished with all this, in moving to Washington State? Now, this was Cambridge, Massachusetts. I said, well, actually, yes, my wife is interested in doing her graduate work at the University of Washington. He said, well, I just have gotten a letter from the Evergreen State College in Washington. They're looking for an evaluator. I thought to myself, what's an evaluator? He said, I'd like to recommend you for the job. I said, great, that sounds good. So I went to Evergreen. I did get the job. I worked there for a couple of years. A lot of my work would be today called helping faculty with a scholarship of teaching and learning. I would go to faculty or administrators and say, what do you want to know? I will try to help you answer questions that you have. I'll supply all the money, but only half the time. You have to help frame the question if you don't already have one, and then you have to do half the work in answering the question, but you know, I'll take care of the rest. And my hope was not only to help them answer this particular question, but to help them sort of get in the habit of being able to ask and answer their own questions in order to improve what they were doing. While I was at Evergreen, I just blanked on his name. It was in my head a minute ago. Michael, come back to me in a minute. Michael, somebody or other, is a great evaluation theorist, also a philosopher. He was the fellow who came up with the phrases formative and summative evaluation. Anyway, he came to Evergreen to give a talk, and I'd never met him before, but I was chatting with him, I think, before he spoke, and I said, I don't know what to call what I'm doing, because I'm not an evaluator. I'm not evaluating anybody. I'm working with people to help them answer their questions and so on and so forth, what I just told you. I said, what do I call myself? He said, you're an educator. And that's how I became an educator.